The explosion started at dawn when the skies above Arden 3 turned black with smoke. No one expected an attack that deep into human-controlled space. The military outposts had grown lazy. They believed the front lines were secure. But that morning, everything changed. Private Jason Ward ran through the ash-covered base with his medkit clutched tightly. He had trained for war, but never for chaos like this. Bodies lay in the corridors. Some were human, some were not. The enemy had broken through their perimeter like paper. His orders were simple: retrieve wounded and avoid confrontation. He followed them with shaking hands. Near the western hangar, he heard a noise. It was soft, like a faint breath trying not to be noticed. He stopped. The room was filled with debris. Light flickered from crushed panels. Under a piece of twisted steel, something moved. He pulled it aside carefully. What he saw made him freeze. She was alien, clearly not human. Her skin shimmered in tones of blue and silver. Her face was bruised, lips cracked, and strange symbols blinked faintly on her neck. But her eyes, though dim, still glowed. She was barely alive, barely conscious. She reached out a hand, not in defense, but as if begging for help. Jason didn't think. He grabbed her gently and whispered that she was going to be okay. Later, in the underground med bay, other soldiers saw what he had brought. Laughter echoed through the room. "They left you a souvenir," someone said. "Keep it. No one else wants a broken slave." Jason ignored them. He washed the blood off her body and attached healing patches to her wounds. The monitors beeped weakly. She didn't speak, but her breathing slowly steadied. That night, as the alarms blared again outside, Jason stayed beside her. He didn't even know her name. She didn't know his. But something in her eyes reminded him of pain he had carried too long. Maybe she was used and broken, but he saw something else, a will to live. And that was enough for him to try. She woke up once, gasping. Her body convulsed briefly. Jason held her hand and told her to focus on his voice. She blinked slowly and stared at him. Her voice was too damaged to speak, but a faint tear rolled down her cheek. Jason nodded and whispered that she wasn't alone anymore. 2 days passed. No one came to claim her. The higher command didn't care. To them, she was trash left behind by the enemy. But Jason treated her differently. He fed her, talked to her, even if she never responded. He learned how to adjust the healing interface on her spine. The more he helped her, the more her glow returned. The moment she stood for the first time was shaky. Her knees buckled and her arms trembled. But Jason caught her before she hit the floor. She looked at him, confused. She expected cruelty, expected to be pushed down again. Instead, he smiled. "You're getting stronger," he said. And she didn't look away. One soldier walked by and scoffed, "Still playing nurse for that thing?" Jason didn't respond. But the girl heard. Her gaze dropped and her glow dimmed slightly. Jason reached for her hand again. "Ignore them. You're not a thing. You're someone," he said. Her fingers curled softly around his. The war had moved on. The main battles shifted light years away. The base was being cleared. Orders came to abandon all low-priority cases. She was on the list. "She's not your responsibility," the med officer said. Jason said nothing, but he packed his gear and wheeled her bed toward the exit. They stopped him at the docking bay. "You're not allowed to transport enemy property." Jason stared at the guards, and then at the frail girl behind him. She looked back, not with fear, but waiting to see what he would do. Jason raised his voice. "Then make it official. I'm taking her home as family." The guards laughed. But no one stopped him. The shuttle hissed as it landed on the remote colony of Lisa 9. Jason had chosen this planet for one reason. It was forgotten. No command posts, no watchers. Just a quiet farming world where no one cared about your past. He stepped off the ramp and helped her down carefully. She was walking now, slowly but stronger each day. The locals stared. She was tall, elegant, different in every way. Her skin still shimmered with soft blue pulses. They had never seen someone like her. Jason didn't explain. He rented a small shelter on the outskirts of the town and kept her safe inside. She had no name. He started calling her Lura. She didn't object. Each morning, she woke before sunrise and stood by the window. She watched the fields sway in the wind. Her eyes had healed, but the glow in them was different now. Not just energy. Something deeper. Curiosity. Jason noticed she didn't flinch anymore when he approached. She still didn't speak, but her silence was no longer fear. One evening, as Jason returned from the market, he found her outside, barefoot, walking among the crop rows. The orange light of the twin suns reflected off her skin. A child from the village pointed at her and asked his father if she was a goddess. The man pulled the child away, whispering something cold. Lura heard it but didn't move. That night, Jason sat beside her and said, "You don't have to hide. They'll get used to you." She tilted her head slightly and tapped her chest with 2 fingers. Then she pointed at him. He blinked. "Are you asking for a name?" She nodded once. "Then it's Lura. Your name is Lura," he said. She looked down and smiled for the first time. Days passed, and Lura started doing things on her own. She learned how to cook with the local grains, how to adjust the water flow in the fields, how to mimic the way humans moved and worked. Townspeople still kept their distance, but no one dared to confront Jason. His reputation was quiet but firm. One night, a strange humming filled the air above the colony. Jason grabbed his old rifle and stepped outside. A black ship hovered silently over the hills. It wasn't human. It wasn't local either. Lura stood behind him, her body rigid. She recognized the symbols that flickered on the hull. They were the ones who had left her to die. Jason turned to her. "Do you know them?" She nodded slowly. Her glow dimmed again. "Are they looking for you?" She nodded again. Jason clenched his jaw. He had seen what they did to her once. He wouldn't let it happen again. He told her to stay inside and locked the doors from the outside. That night, the black ship didn't land. It just watched. Lura stood by the window again. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. From rage. She had been broken, tossed away, and now they had returned as if nothing happened. Jason returned and saw her eyes burning brighter than ever before. She was ready to fight if needed. The next morning, Jason found her building something from scraps in the barn. Old wires, tools, energy cells. She assembled them with focus. He asked her what it was. She tapped her forehead gently and then pointed at the sky. He understood. It was a signal jammer. She was protecting their home before. They returned. That night, Jason couldn't sleep. He sat outside under the stars, rifle on his lap. Lura came beside him and sat in silence. Then she reached out and placed her hand over his. He looked at her, surprised. Her eyes met his. This time, there was no pain in them, only trust. Only connection. In that moment, Jason knew something had changed. She wasn't just someone he rescued. She was someone who had chosen to stay, not because she owed him anything, but because she had found something here she never had before. A place to belong. And that was something even the galaxy couldn't take away. Asterisk. The black ship returned after 5 days. This time, it came lower. Dust flew as it hovered above the far side of the colony. Jason stood near the house with his rifle across his back. Lura stood beside him, dressed in the same patchwork gear she had finished building the signal jammer. But she didn't look relieved. Jason asked if she was ready. She gave a short nod. The ship wasn't here for peace. It was scanning the land, looking for her signal. But it wouldn't find it. She had masked everything. Still, the ship didn't leave. It hovered for hours. Then it dropped something from its cargo bay and pulled away into the sky. The object hit the ground hard. It wasn't a bomb. It was a body, a message. Jason ran to it and saw a creature like Lura, but different. The body was bruised, barely alive. Jason checked for a pulse. It was weak, but it was there. Lura knelt beside him. Her expression was cold. She recognized the mark on the body's chest. It was her sister. Jason carried the alien girl into the house and placed her on the same cot Lura had once used. Lura stood quietly as he worked. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. But her glow faded as if her heart had been dimmed. Jason placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll save her too," he said. She closed her eyes and nodded once. The town had grown uneasy. Word had spread of the ship. The mayor visited Jason's home with 2 armed men. "We want you and your guests gone," he said. "You're bringing trouble here." Jason stood tall and said nothing. Lura stepped forward. She placed her hand on her chest, then pointed at the weak girl inside. The mayor hesitated but still repeated his demand. Jason packed quickly. He didn't argue. He had seen this before. Fear always turned neighbors into enemies. He loaded supplies onto a hover cart and placed Lura's sister carefully inside. Lura walked beside them as they left the town behind. No one said goodbye. No one offered help. But Jason didn't look back. They found shelter in the abandoned mining caves north of the ridge. The caves were dark, cold, but safe. Lura lit the walls with portable lights. Jason started a small fire and boiled water. The injured girl groaned softly in her sleep. Her skin was dull. Her breath came in shallow waves. Jason checked her vitals and whispered to Lura that she didn't have much time. Lura worked without words. She connected pieces from her old jammer to the healing unit. She used pieces of her own core module to stabilize her sister. Jason tried to stop her. "You'll weaken yourself," he warned. She shook her head. She pointed at her sister, and then at her own chest. Jason understood. She would share life if that's what it took. For hours they worked. Jason stayed at her side, guiding tools, adjusting settings, patching torn tissue. Slowly, the girl's breath grew stronger. Her body stopped shaking. Her glow began to return. Lura collapsed from exhaustion beside her. Jason lifted her carefully and laid her next to her sister. He whispered that she had done it. Days passed in silence. Jason hunted small creatures and gathered supplies. Lura regained strength. Her sister, who they began calling Rel, opened her eyes at last. She didn't speak, but she smiled when Lura held her hand. It was a quiet smile, a thankful one. Jason felt something shift inside. He had rescued one soul. Now he had helped rescue 2. The peace didn't last long. One morning, Lura stepped out of the cave and saw marks in the sand. Not animal tracks, boots, fresh. Too many for just one traveler. Jason examined them and his face turned cold. "They've found us," he said. Lura nodded. They both looked back at the cave. They knew what came next. Jason set traps around the cave's entrance. He knew they wouldn't stop a full team, but they might slow them down. Lura helped by placing motion sensors along the ridge. She moved quickly, her hands steady. Her body was still recovering, but her eyes burned with purpose. She would not be taken again. Rel sat quietly inside the cave, her back against the wall. She watched her sister work. Her voice hadn't returned, but her glow had brightened. When Jason handed her a cup of warm broth, she nodded and pressed her hand against his chest. He looked down at her fingers, then met her eyes. She trusted him now. The first warning came at dusk. A low hum echoed across the valley. Jason looked through the thermal lens and saw figures moving through the rocks. 5, maybe 6. They were wearing black armor. Same kind that had once held Lura in chains. She didn't need to see them to know who they were. Jason motioned for silence and handed Lura a modified plasma pistol. She held it tightly. Her fingers trembled for only a second before gripping it with both hands. Rel pulled her legs in and pressed herself against the wall. Jason whispered that they would not let anyone take her away again. A sharp flash lit. The outer tunnel, one of the traps exploded. Screams followed. Then silence. Jason raised his rifle and aimed toward the entrance. Shadows moved. The second trap burst, sending a shower of sparks through the narrow pass. A body rolled into view, its armor cracked and smoking. Then they spoke. A voice boomed through a comm device. "We are not here to negotiate. Return the property or be destroyed." Jason looked at Lura. She shook her head slowly. He shouted, "Back, she's not your property." The cave rumbled as a blast struck the outer wall. Lura moved closer to the edge and fired. The pistol's beam struck another attacker. Jason joined her, firing round after round. The air filled with smoke and heat. The enemy began to retreat, but not before tossing a glowing orb into the tunnel. Jason grabbed Lura and dove to cover as the shockwave roared past. When the dust cleared, Lura pushed herself up and looked for Rel. The younger girl was still breathing, but she was bleeding from her shoulder. Jason rushed over and began sealing the wound. Lura knelt beside him, pressing a healing patch gently against her sister's chest. Her eyes welled with light, but she didn't cry. They had stopped. The first wave, but they knew more would come. Jason looked at the gear they had left. Not much ammo, no backup, no safe haven. He turned to Lura. "We can't stay here," she nodded. She picked up her tools and packed what she could. Rel stirred and whispered something soft. Lura leaned in and smiled. They left the cave at night, walking under the pale moons. Jason carried Rel on his back while Lura scanned for enemy signals. They stayed close to the rocks, moving slowly, step by step. Behind them, the mountain glowed faintly from damage. Ahead of them, silence stretched into the desert. By morning, they reached an old transport hub buried under sand. Jason remembered it from old maps, abandoned before the war. Lura helped him dig out the entrance. Inside, the air was stale but breathable. The lights still worked. They laid Rel down on a bench and set up a perimeter. Jason sat beside Lura and handed her a ration bar. "We'll have to fix the transmitter. Maybe call someone who still believes in justice." Lura took a bite and looked at the floor. Then she spoke. Her voice was raspy, unused, but clear. "We don't need justice, we need freedom." Jason stared at her, stunned. It was the first time he had heard her voice. Asterisk. Jason couldn't stop staring at her after she spoke. The sound of her voice was unexpected, gentle, but full of strength. She looked at him without fear now, without pain. That one word she spoke, freedom, held more weight than any weapon. They carried. He nodded slowly and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then let's build it," he said. She nodded once, then stood and walked toward the transmitter station buried in the wall. Dust covered the controls, but she wiped them clean with careful hands. She knew how to work with machines. Rel stirred on the bench. Her shoulder had stabilized, but she was still weak. Jason knelt beside her and gave her water. She took it. Slowly, her lips trembling. "Where are we?" she whispered. Lura turned at the sound and moved closer. "Safe, for now," she replied. Rel smiled faintly at her sister. Outside, the wind picked up. Jason placed scrap metal near the entrance to mask heat signatures. He had lived through enough battles to know this was not over. The ship would return. He could feel it in his bones. Lura joined him and looked up at the sky. She pointed to the horizon. "We have little time," she said. They worked together. Jason restored the power lines, while Lura calibrated the broadcast dish. Rel helped as best she could, using her limited energy to align the backup generator. Time moved fast. Hours turned into a blur of cables, fuses, and silent teamwork. By nightfall, the system came to life. The signal pulsed once, then twice. Lura input the encrypted distress code. It was not sent to human command. It was directed to those who once served with her people. Rebels, survivors, outcasts. She had memorized the frequency long ago. Now it was their only chance. Jason watched her with quiet respect. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was a stand. A message to those who abandoned her. She was not hiding anymore. She was calling others to rise. He placed his rifle beside the entrance and sat beside her. "You're not the same girl they left behind," he said. She looked at him, the soft glow of the monitor lighting her face. "Neither are you," she replied. Jason didn't answer. He didn't need to. In the silence, something passed between them. Not words, not promises, just an understanding. They had crossed a line together. There was no turning back. The next morning, the sky cracked open. The black ship returned with more force. 2 others followed it, smaller but faster. Jason armed the traps they had set near the entrance. Lura handed Rel a small pulse blade and told her to stay low. Rel nodded, her face calm despite the fear in her eyes. This time, the enemy didn't wait. They fired into the hub immediately. Metal screamed and walls shook. Jason fired back through the smoke. Lura stood beside him, aiming with focus. The enemy poured through the side tunnels. Explosions rocked the ground. But they didn't back down. Rel struck the first attacker that came close. Her blade found the weak spot in the armor. Jason covered her with fire. Lura rewired a power line and unleashed a blast that fried half the tunnel. The hub became a storm of light, smoke, and grit. They fought not for escape, but for a future. When the dust settled, bodies lay across the rubble. The ships retreated once again, this time burning. Jason dropped to one knee, panting. Lura stood beside him, covered in ash. Rel crawled forward and leaned against her sister. Silence returned, heavy and sharp. But they had won again. The battlefield was quiet now. Smoke drifted upward like thin fingers toward the sky. Jason leaned against the shattered wall of the transport hub, his arm bleeding but still strong. Lura sat beside him, holding Rel in her lap. The younger girl had passed out from exhaustion, but her chest rose and fell steadily. They had survived. Barely. The bodies of their attackers were scattered across the sand and stone. Lura stared at them in silence. Her glow had dimmed, but her eyes burned brighter than ever. Jason turned to her slowly. "They'll keep coming," he said. She nodded without speaking. The transmitter pulsed again. A new signal was incoming. Lura rose to her feet and walked to the console. Jason followed, his steps heavy. On the small screen, a new message flickered. A voice crackled through, speaking in Lura's native tongue. Her expression changed. Not fear, not anger. Surprise. Jason couldn't understand the words, but he knew the tone. Whoever was speaking, it wasn't an enemy. Lura tapped a reply into the console. She answered with calm urgency. The voice responded again, louder now. Lura turned to Jason and said, "They heard us, and they're coming here, not to fight, to join us." For the first time in days, Jason smiled. Reinforcements. Maybe not soldiers, but free ones. Escaped slaves, refugees, people who still believed in something better. Lura stepped outside to scan the skies. Jason walked beside her. The wind carried the scent of scorched earth and hope in equal measure. Hours passed before the first craft appeared. It was small, rusty, but fast. Then another followed, then 2 more. The valley filled with the hum of repurposed ships. Lura stood tall, watching them land. Jason helped Rel sit up so she could see. Her eyes widened as figures stepped out. Different races, different scars, but all with the same fire in their eyes. One by one, they gathered around Lura. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her presence spoke for her. They had seen what she'd done, what they had all done. Jason stood behind her, silent but proud. These people didn't want war. They wanted freedom. And they had come to fight for it. A tall, armored being stepped forward. He bowed his head to Lura and placed a mark on her arm. Jason reached for his rifle, unsure of the gesture. But Lura raised her hand and smiled. "It's a sign of respect," she said. "They follow me now, not as property." As a leader, Jason looked at her, truly looked. She had gone from prisoner to protector, from abandoned to chosen. And now she was no longer hiding in caves or begging to survive. She was building something new. A place where no one was owned, no one was forgotten. A place she could finally call home. Rel joined her sister. The two of them stood side by side as the wind lifted the dust around their feet. Jason stepped between them. "What now?" he asked. Lura looked at the people around them. Then she looked at the rising sun. "Now we build. And when they return, we'll show them we are not afraid." The sun rose higher over the valley, casting golden light across the battered hills. Jason stood at the edge of the camp, watching the newcomers unload crates of supplies. Tools, weapons, food, everything needed to start again. It didn't look like an army. It looked like a family preparing to defend what mattered. Lura moved through the camp with quiet command. She spoke to each group, listening more than speaking. She had never worn medals or ranks, but the people followed her. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. They believed in her. Jason believed in her too. Rel sat under the shadow of a newly built shelter, her eyes scanning the horizon. Her injuries had healed. She still spoke little, but her hands worked fast. She was building, helping, living. Jason handed her a toolkit, and she gave a small nod. That nod meant everything. At the center of camp, Lura drew lines in the sand with a metal rod. She was showing them where to place defense towers, sensor posts, and power banks. Jason joined her and pointed toward the east ridge. "They'll come from there," he said. She looked at the ridge and nodded once. As night fell, the camp glowed with quiet lights. Music drifted from a group of refugees sitting around a fire. Children played near tents. It was not a stronghold yet, but it was alive. Jason looked around and realized they had done more than survive. They had built something worth defending. Later that night, Lura sat beside Jason on a rock near the edge of the base. The stars above them shimmered in a field of endless black. "Do you think they'll come again?" she asked. Jason nodded slowly. "Yes, and they'll be angry this time." She didn't flinch. "Then we'll be ready," she said. Jason turned toward her. "You were supposed to be a joke," he sighed. "Something broken. Something left to die." Lura looked at him, eyes calm. They didn't understand what they threw away. Jason smiled. "No, but now they will." He stood and reached out a hand. She took it without hesitation. Word spread faster than the enemy had expected. Stories of a free outpost in the desert. Stories of an alien girl who had once been a slave, and now commanded her own. Of a human soldier who stayed by her side. More came, some broken, some strong. All looking for the same thing. Freedom. In the weeks that followed, the black ships returned. But this time, the desert did not tremble. The people stood tall. The defense towers fired back. The ground was not given. It was earned. The enemy fled, not just beaten, but humiliated. They had underestimated what one act of kindness could create. Jason stood at the top of the ridge, rifle in hand, watching the smoke rise in the distance. Lura climbed beside him, her glow steady, her gaze sharp. She reached for his hand and held it tight. He looked at her and said, This is your world now. She shook her head slowly. No, it's ours.